Hezekiah emerges as one of the most decisive figures in the history of the kingdom of Judah, not only because of the decisions he made, but because of the critical moment in which he was called to rule. His reign did not begin in a time of stability or spiritual faithfulness, but in an era marked by moral deterioration, normalized idolatry, and a deep disconnection between the people and their God. Precisely within that context of decay, Hezekiah was raised up as a leader willing to swim against the current. From the beginning, his life was marked by a clear tension between the inheritance he received and the path he chose to follow. Judah was coming out of years of disobedience, of pagan practices tolerated and even promoted from the throne, and of an almost complete abandonment of true worship. Yet Hezekiah did not accept that reality as inevitable. Unlike many leaders who merely manage the ruin they inherit, he chose to confront it. The name of Hezekiah became associated with deep restoration. He did not limit himself to superficial adjustments or symbolic gestures. His leadership was defined by a clear conviction: the heart of the people had to return to God. That conviction led him to carry out decisive spiritual reforms, to restore the temple, to eliminate idolatry, and to face external threats with a faith that did not depend on military power, but on absolute trust in God. Hezekiah's reign was also marked by extreme challenges. The powerful Assyrian Empire became a real and constant threat, testing not only Judah's military capacity, but the faith of its king. In the midst of pressure, intimidation, and collective fear, Hezekiah demonstrated a leadership that combined strategic action with spiritual dependence. His story is not only that of a religious reformer, but of a man who learned to govern from prayer. Throughout this biblical journey, we will see how Hezekiah moved from restoring worship in Jerusalem to facing one of the most feared sieges of the ancient world, how he experienced miraculous healing when his life was in danger, and how even a faithful king can make mistakes that leave lasting consequences. His life is an honest reflection of faith lived in tension, obedience and weakness, victory and warning, faithfulness and difficult lessons. The story of Hezekiah does not belong only to the past. It is a living testimony of what it means to lead with devotion in dark times, to trust God when everything seems lost, and to understand that the true strength of a kingdom is not found in its walls, but in its relationship with the Lord. Hezekiah's reign cannot be understood without honestly examining the spiritual condition he inherited. Before he ascended the throne, Judah had been ruled by his father, King Ahaz, one of the monarchs most distant from the will of God in the history of the kingdom. His leadership left deep scars, not only in politics and national security, but in the very relationship between the people and their creator. Ahaz had normalized idolatry. Under his rule, pagan altars multiplied, foreign practices were adopted without resistance, and the temple of the Lord was despised. These were not isolated mistakes or moments of spiritual weakness, but a consistent pattern of decisions that led the people away from God. Ahaz did not merely tolerate idolatry, he actively promoted it. The situation reached alarming extremes. The king shut the doors of the temple, interrupting worship and leaving the people without a spiritual center. This was not a symbolic gesture, but a clear declaration. Worship of the God of Israel no longer held a place of priority. In its place, altars were erected on every corner of Jerusalem, dedicated to foreign gods, reflecting a spiritually fragmented nation. Fear governed the kingdom's decisions. When Judah faced external threats, Ahaz did not seek God's guidance. Instead of trusting in the Lord, he turned to political alliances with foreign powers, submitting himself to the dominance of the Assyrian Empire. That dependence not only weakened the sovereignty of the kingdom, but also introduced even deeper pagan practices, as Ahaz adopted the religious models of his allies. The result was devastating. Judah lost its identity, security, and sense of purpose. Faith became superficial, mixed, and confused. The people no longer clearly distinguished between what was holy and what was profane. Relationship with God was replaced by empty rituals and fear-driven decisions. Hezekiah grew up witnessing all of this. From an early age, he observed a leadership ruled by fear rather than faith, one that sought human solutions instead of divine direction. The inheritance he received was not one of stability or obedience, but of carefully constructed spiritual ruin. Yet that inheritance did not define him. Hezekiah did not repeat his father's pattern. Where Ahaz closed the doors of the temple, Hezekiah determined to open them. Where his father sought refuge in human alliances, He would learn to seek help in God. The darkness of the past was not an excuse to continue in error, but the contrast that would highlight the radical decision he was about to make. The nation did not yet realize it, but the king who had grown up under a shadow of disobedience was about to lead one of the deepest movements of spiritual restoration Judah had ever experienced. History would not move forward by inertia. It was about to change direction. One of Hezekiah's first decisions as king was also one of the most symbolic. He did not begin by strengthening the army or renegotiating political alliances. His priority was spiritual. He understood that as long as the temple remained closed, Judah would continue to be spiritually paralyzed. For that reason, in the very first year of his reign, he made a decision that marked a clear turning point. He opened the doors of the temple of the Lord. Those doors had not been closed by accident. They had been deliberately sealed during the reign of Ahaz, as a reflection of a conscious rejection of true worship. The temple, which was meant to be the spiritual heart of the nation, had been left in silence, without sacrifices, without communal prayer, without the teaching of the law. The people had lost their center. By opening those doors again, Hezekiah was declaring that Judah had to turn its gaze back toward God. The reopening of the temple was not merely an administrative act. It was a public proclamation of a change in direction. Hezekiah understood that restoring worship was not simply about reactivating rituals, but about repairing a broken relationship. The temple had to become once again a place of encounter between God and his people, not a forgotten building that reminded them of an abandoned faith. But opening the doors was not enough. The interior of the temple had been contaminated. Years of neglect, idolatry, and improper practices had left deep marks. Before worship could be restored, it was necessary to cleanse, purify, and reconsecrate that space. Hezekiah knew that genuine worship cannot be offered in a place that has been profaned without first confronting that reality. For this reason, the king summoned the priests and the Levites. He gathered them with a clear purpose: to restore the holiness of the temple. He spoke to them plainly, reminding them that they had been called to serve the Lord, and that they now carried the responsibility of cleansing the house of God. He did not accuse them harshly, but neither did he soften the seriousness of the moment. Restoration required commitment and obedience. The response was immediate. The priests and Levites set themselves to obey. They began a meticulous process of purification, removing everything that did not belong in the temple. Every improper object was taken out. Every space was cleansed. Every area was prepared once again for worship. This work was neither quick nor superficial. It was intentional and thorough. The cleansing of the temple symbolized something greater. As the building was being purified, the people began to understand that spiritual restoration involved removing whatever had contaminated their relationship with God. The temple was a reflection of the heart of the nation. By cleansing it, Hezekiah was sending a clear message. Judah had to be restored from the inside out. As the process of purification advanced, the elements of worship were restored. The consecrated utensils were prepared, the sacrifices were organized, and the priestly service was returned to its proper place. Worship, which had been interrupted for so long, began to resound once more in Jerusalem. It was not merely religious noise, it was a sign of spiritual life returning to a nation that had been asleep. This initial act set the tone for Hezekiah's entire reign. It showed that his leadership would not be guided by political convenience but by faithfulness to God. Before confronting external enemies or resolving national crises, he chose to confront the root of the problem, the spiritual disconnection of the people. And by opening the temple, he also opened the door to a restoration that would go far beyond a single building. With the temple once again open, Hezekiah understood that restoration could not be sustained by royal decisions alone. The building could be available, but without consecrated hearts, worship would once again become empty. For that reason, the next step was direct and demanding: to summon those who had been specifically called to serve in the presence of God. The king gathered the priests and the Levites. He did not do so to celebrate an achievement, but to confront a responsibility. Hezekiah spoke with clarity, reminding them that they were descendants of those who had been set apart to minister before the Lord. Their calling was neither optional nor symbolic. They had been chosen to uphold the spiritual life of the nation, and for years that calling had been neglected. His words were not gentle. Hezekiah did not hide the seriousness of the moment. He acknowledged that the wrath of the Lord had fallen upon Judah precisely because spiritual leaders had failed in their duty. The abandonment of the temple, the interruption of worship, and the tolerance of idolatry had not occurred without consequences. Now, restoration required that those who ministered assume their role with seriousness. The call was both personal and collective. Hezekiah asked them to sanctify themselves, not only externally but from the heart. The cleansing of the temple had to be accompanied by internal purification. They could not serve rightly if they themselves were spiritually contaminated. Restoration would not begin in the people unless it first began in the leaders. The Levites responded to the call. Far from resisting, they embraced the responsibility. They acknowledged their part in the neglect and set themselves to obey. They began a process of consecration that involved spiritual preparation, repentance, and alignment with the will of God. It was not an automatic act, but a conscious decision to return to their original purpose. The sanctification took time. Each step was carried out according to the established instructions. The priests entered the temple to purify it, and the Levites supported the process by removing everything that had been considered unclean. Nothing was rushed. They understood that haste could produce appearance but not genuine transformation. During this process, something began to change. Restoration ceased to be only a royal initiative and began to become a shared movement. Spiritual leaders began to align themselves with Hezekiah's vision. Service was no longer a forgotten burden, but a recovered privilege. When the consecration was completed, a report was presented to the king. The priests informed him that the temple had been completely purified, that the utensils had been restored, and that everything was ready for worship to resume according to the law. That report marked a crucial moment. Judah was ready to worship properly once again. Hezekiah's summons revealed a fundamental truth. Spiritual restoration is never automatic. It requires leadership that confronts, servants who respond, and a collective willingness to assume responsibility. Without that combination, any reform fades over time. With the leaders consecrated and the temple purified, the stage was set. Worship was about to be restored publicly, and with it the relationship between God and his people would begin to heal in a visible way. With the temple purified and the priests once again consecrated, Hezekiah understood that restoration would not be complete without recovering what had been abandoned for years, the celebration that remembered the very origin of the people as a redeemed nation. The Passover was not merely a date on the calendar. It was a living reminder of deliverance, covenant, and spiritual identity. To restore it meant to retell the story from its foundation. The decision to celebrate the Passover was bold. For a long time it had not been observed according to the law. Internal divisions, idolatry, and spiritual neglect had fragmented the people. Even so, Hezekiah did not allow the imperfections of the present to cancel obedience. He chose humility over delay and moved forward with restoration rather than postponing it any longer. The invitation was wide and surprising. Hezekiah did not limit the call to Judah alone. He sent messengers throughout the regions of the former northern kingdom, inviting the remnant of Israel to return to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover of the Lord together. This gesture carried deep meaning. In a time marked by historic division, the king extended an invitation to spiritual reconciliation, reminding the people that the original covenant had been made with one united nation. The response was mixed. Some mocked the message, others ignored it completely. But there were those who responded with humility and chose to travel to Jerusalem. Restoration is never embraced by everyone, but it always finds willing hearts. Hezekiah understood that obedience does not depend on unanimity but on faithfulness. The celebration was not perfect. Many who came were not ritually prepared according to the law. Yet instead of excluding them, Hezekiah interceded on their behalf. He prayed that the Lord would pardon those who had set their hearts on seeking him, even though they did not fully understand every detail of proper observance. That prayer revealed a pastoral heart, one more concerned with genuine restoration than with empty formality. God responded favorably. Scripture states that the Lord heard Hezekiah's prayer and healed the people. The Passover became a time of joy, unity, and spiritual renewal. The rejoicing was so profound that the celebration was extended beyond its appointed time, as an expression of a restoration that generations had long awaited. The city overflowed with praise. Jerusalem resonated with songs, sacrifices, and thanksgiving. The people experienced a joy that did not come from material prosperity or political security, but from reconciliation with God. The restored Passover reminded them that their identity was not defined by recent failures, but by God's faithfulness throughout their history. This moment solidified the reform. The restoration of worship was not only structural, but emotional and spiritual. The people once again felt part of something greater than their divisions. The Passover reconnected them with their past and realigned them with their purpose. Hezekiah had accomplished more than reorganizing the temple. He had begun to heal the heart of a fragmented nation, reminding them who they were, where they came from, and to whom they belonged. After the Passover, spiritual restoration did not stop at the emotion of the moment. Hezekiah understood that an authentic spiritual experience must be translated into firm and visible decisions. The celebration had united the people, but now it was necessary to confront everything that still competed with faithfulness to God. Reform could not coexist with remnants of idolatry that had been tolerated for generations. The people went out throughout all of Judah. Moved by the spirit of renewal, they began to destroy the high places, tear down pagan altars, and break the images that represented false gods. This was not a cold command issued from the throne. It was a collective response. Restoration had touched the hearts of the people, and that internal change now expressed itself through action. Idolatry was confronted at its root. Hezekiah did not allow historic symbols or traditional practices that contradicted obedience to God to remain. He understood that spiritual mixture had been one of the primary causes of Judah's decline. For that reason, the reform was neither selective nor partial. Everything that diverted the people from God had to be removed. One of the most significant acts was the destruction of the bronze serpent. That serpent had originally been an instrument of healing in the days of Moses, but over time it had become an object of worship. The people burned incense to it, forgetting that its value was not in the object itself, but in obedience to God. Hezekiah destroyed it, demonstrating that even something with a legitimate origin can become idolatrous when it takes God's place. This act was deeply symbolic. It showed that reform would not bow to tradition or religious sentimentality. Hezekiah understood that obedience requires discernment. Not everything old is sacred, and not everything religious honors God. True faithfulness demands a continual evaluation of what is being revered. The elimination of idolatry brought spiritual clarity. The people began once again to distinguish between what was holy and what was profane. The reform did not only cleanse the land, it cleansed the conscience. By tearing down visible idols, internal dependencies that had replaced trust in God were also confronted. This moment solidified Hezekiah's leadership. Scripture states that he trusted in the Lord like no other king of Judah after David. This trust was not theoretical, but demonstrated through courageous decisions. By cutting ties with idolatry, Hezekiah made it clear that his reign would be defined by loyalty to God, not by popular approval. The reform continued to advance with strength. Judah was beginning to experience a deep transformation, but the challenges were not over. Spiritual faithfulness would soon be tested by an external threat that would place everything that had been restored under intense pressure. Once idolatry had been confronted and removed, Hezekiah understood that spiritual restoration could not be sustained without structure. Worship had been recovered, but it now needed to be organized, protected, and cared for so that it would not deteriorate again over time. Initial enthusiasm had to become lasting discipline. The king re-established the service divisions. Priests and Levites were assigned according to their specific responsibilities. Each had a clearly defined role within worship: sacrifices, singing, teaching, and the care of the temple. This organization was not bureaucratic, it was spiritual. Hezekiah knew that disorder weakens obedience, and that faithfulness requires rhythm and consistency. He also ensured provision for those who served. For years, many Levites had abandoned their duties because they lacked support. Hezekiah corrected this injustice. He ordered the people to bring tithes and offerings according to the law, not as coercion but as a response to God's care. In doing so, he restored dignity to spiritual service. The people's response was abundant. Contributions began to arrive in such quantity that storehouses had to be organized to hold them. This generosity did not arise from pressure, but from renewed hearts. When worship is restored, generosity often follows. The people understood that sustaining the work of the temple was part of their covenant commitment. Hezekiah supervised the process carefully. He appointed faithful men to manage the offerings and ensure they were distributed properly. Transparency was essential. The king knew that spiritual restoration could quickly collapse if corruption or abuse were allowed. Faithfulness had to be expressed not only in worship, but also in administration. This order brought stability. The Levites were able to dedicate themselves fully to their calling without distraction. Worship became consistent, organized, and alive. Restoration ceased to be an extraordinary event and became a daily practice. Obedience began to take root. By establishing structure, provision, and discipline, Hezekiah was sowing continuity. He understood that the true challenge was not starting reform, but sustaining it over time. Every organizational decision was aimed at protecting what God had restored. Judah was spiritually aligned, but that alignment would soon be tested. For when a people turn their hearts back to God, opposition is never far behind, and a powerful threat was already approaching from the north. With spiritual restoration firmly established, Judah entered a new stage in its history, one in which faithfulness to God would be tested by a tangible and terrifying threat. The Assyrian Empire, known for its brutality and overwhelming military power, began advancing decisively across the region. No nation seemed capable of resisting it. Judah was no exception. Hezekiah understood the gravity of the moment. Faith did not make him naive. Trusting God did not mean ignoring reality. The king knew that Jerusalem had to prepare for a possible siege. Spiritual restoration did not cancel strategic responsibility. For that reason, he took practical measures aimed at protecting the city and strengthening the people's ability to endure. One of his first actions was to reinforce the defenses. Hezekiah ordered the repair of Jerusalem's walls, rebuilding collapsed sections and strengthening vulnerable points. This was not merely about stacking stones. It was about restoring collective confidence. The walls represented security, but also resolve. He also reorganized the army. The king gathered the officers, reinforced military discipline, and prepared the men for defense. Yet he made something unmistakably clear. Strength would not be their ultimate foundation. In the midst of preparation, Hezekiah spoke to the people, urging them not to fear the enemy, and reminding them that although Assyria possessed a powerful army, Judah possessed something greater, the presence of the Lord. His words were decisive. Hezekiah declared that the enemy trusted in human strength, but they trusted in God. That statement did not negate military preparation. It gave it meaning. Strategy was necessary, but confidence did not rest in it. The balance between responsible action and deep faith defined this moment of his reign. The people listened and responded. The king's words infused courage. The prior spiritual restoration had prepared hearts to believe. This was not empty optimism, but faith that had been tested and strengthened through obedience. Judah was beginning to understand that faithfulness to God does not remove conflict, but transforms the way it is faced. The Assyrian threat was no longer abstract. Nearby cities had fallen. The danger was real, close, and devastating. Yet Jerusalem did not freeze in fear. The city prepared itself both physically and spiritually. Hezekiah was leading with a complete vision, guarding both the visible walls and the invisible strength of the people's hearts. Faith was not passive. It expressed itself in work, organization, and courage. Every stone placed, every weapon readied, every word of encouragement spoken reflected an active trust in God. Judah did not surrender to fear, nor did it rely solely on human capability. The test was drawing near, and everything that had been restored, worship, obedience, unity, would soon be placed before one of the greatest challenges in the nation's history. The city was being prepared not only to withstand an attack, but to demonstrate where its true confidence lay. As the Assyrian threat drew ever closer, Hezekiah understood that preparation could not be only visible. Not everything needed to be announced or displayed openly. Part of the strategy required discretion, foresight, and a vision that looked beyond immediate fear. Jerusalem had to be ready to endure not only a frontal attack, but a prolonged siege. One of the greatest challenges was water. The city depended on external water sources that could easily be controlled by the enemy. Hezekiah understood that if Jerusalem lost access to water, resistance would be impossible. For that reason, he made a strategic decision that combined human ingenuity with spiritual responsibility, securing the city's water supply from within. The project was ambitious and silent. Hezekiah ordered that the waters of the Gihon spring be diverted into Jerusalem through a tunnel carved into the rock. This undertaking was not improvised. It required planning, coordination, and collective effort. 2 teams worked from opposite ends, cutting through solid stone, advancing without sight until they met in the heart of the rock. The tunnel was more than a technical achievement. It was an expression of wise leadership. Hezekiah did not wait for a miracle to replace human responsibility. He acted with foresight, understanding that authentic faith does not neglect the means God places within reach. Preparing was not a lack of trust. It was a way of honoring the lives of the people entrusted to his care. By securing water inside the city, Hezekiah weakened the enemy's strategy. Assyria could surround Jerusalem, but it could not easily starve it into submission. The city would have life even under pressure. This quiet action gave Judah a crucial advantage, even if many did not immediately grasp its significance. The people worked together. The construction of the tunnel became a collective effort that strengthened internal unity. Every strike of the chisel represented resistance, hope, and determination. While the enemy advanced with visible force, Jerusalem was being strengthened from within, without display or provocation. This preparation revealed Hezekiah's character. He did not govern by impulse or panic. He knew when to speak and when to act in silence. He knew when to encourage the people publicly and when to make strategic. Understood that the victory was not the result of chance or coincidence, but the direct outcome of prayer, humility, and faithfulness. This event redefined the people's faith. The Assyrian threat had been an extreme test, and the deliverance confirmed that trusting in God was not naive. It was the safest choice. Divine intervention not only saved the city, but restored collective confidence in the power of the Lord. Hezekiah was exalted, not through personal pride, but because his leadership consistently pointed toward God. The king had done what was right when everything was at risk. He prayed, trusted, and waited. That posture was honored with a victory no human being could claim. The night of deliverance was etched into Judah's memory. It became a testimony passed down through generations, not as a story of human heroism, but as a reminder that God fights for those who fully trust in him. Yet Hezekiah's story was not finished. After the external victory, the king would face a different battle, more personal and more silent, that would test his heart in an unexpected way. After the miraculous deliverance of Jerusalem, Hezekiah faced a different kind of trial, one that was silent, personal, and deeply confronting. It did not arrive in the form of armies or external threats, but as a crisis that forced him to face his own fragility. The king became gravely ill, to the point that his life was in immediate danger. This time, the battle would not be fought on the city walls but within his own heart. The word he received was unmistakable. The prophet Isaiah came to Hezekiah with a clear message. He was to put his house in order, for his illness would lead to death. There were no gentle preliminaries or comforting reassurances. The king who had witnessed God's mighty intervention against Assyria now had to confront the possibility of an imminent end. Hezekiah's response was profoundly human. He turned his face toward the wall and began to pray. In that intimate moment, away from the people and royal protocol, he poured out his heart before God. He did not appeal to another's merit or to abstract promises. He recalled his own faithfulness, his integrity of walk, and his sincere desire to please the Lord. His prayer was accompanied by genuine tears. Hezekiah did not deny his fear, nor did he attempt to display false strength. He presented himself as he was, vulnerable, aware of his limits, and in need of mercy. That honesty marked the moment. The prayer was not a cold negotiation, but a plea born out of a real relationship with God. The divine response was immediate. Before Isaiah had left the middle courtyard, God spoke again and sent him back to the king. The message had changed. The Lord had heard Hezekiah's prayer and seen his tears. His life would be extended by 15 more years. In addition, God reaffirmed his commitment to protect Jerusalem from its enemies. The promise was accompanied by a sign. Hezekiah asked for confirmation, and God granted an extraordinary sign. The shadow on the sundial moved backward 10 steps. This was not merely a physical wonder, but a clear declaration that God held absolute control over time, life, and destiny. The healing was not only physical. Hezekiah received a second chance. His life was restored, but so was his perspective. He had been confronted with the brevity of existence and with the undeserved mercy of God. The experience left a deep mark on his spirit. The king composed a song. In it, he expressed gratitude, reflection, and humility. He acknowledged that affliction had been a means of instruction, and that God had rescued his life from the pit. The illness, far from destroying him, became an instrument of transformation. This stage revealed an essential truth. Even after great spiritual victories, human beings remain fragile. Faith does not eliminate weakness, but it provides a safe place to bring it. Hezekiah learned that life itself is a gift sustained by the grace of God. Yet this renewed opportunity would also bring another test, for receiving mercy does not guarantee that the heart will always remain watchful. And soon, an unexpected visit would put the king's humility to the test. After his healing and the extraordinary sign that confirmed God's mercy, Hezekiah entered a different stage of his reign. His fame had spread beyond Judah. Surrounding nations had heard of his miraculous recovery and of the defeat of the Assyrian army. In that context, envoys arrived from Babylon, sent by its king, apparently to congratulate him and to learn more about the remarkable events that had taken place. The visit seemed harmless. The Babylonian messengers arrived with courteous words, apparent interest, and diplomatic gestures. For Hezekiah, their presence represented international recognition. After years of threat and pressure, this external attention could feel like validation. Yet this moment would reveal an unexpected weakness in the king's heart. Hezekiah welcomed them enthusiastically. Instead of discerning carefully the intentions behind the visit, he chose to display everything he possessed. He opened the treasuries of his kingdom to them: the silver, the gold, the spices, the precious ointments, the armory, and all the stored resources. Nothing was held back. Everything was exposed with pride. This act was not merely diplomatic. It was an expression of vanity. Hezekiah, who had trusted fully in God during the Assyrian threat, now appeared to place confidence in the impression he could make on other kingdoms. Without realizing it, he momentarily shifted his dependence from God to a quiet self-affirmation. The prophet Isaiah confronted the king. When Isaiah learned of the visit, he asked where the messengers had come from and what they had seen. Hezekiah answered openly, admitting that he had shown them everything. Then Isaiah spoke a word that changed the tone of the moment entirely. The warning was clear and sobering. Isaiah announced that days would come when everything Hezekiah had shown would be carried away to Babylon. Even some of his own descendants would be taken and would serve in the palace of the king of Babylon. This was not an immediate threat, but a future consequence revealed by the attitude that had been exposed. Hezekiah's response was complex. He accepted the word of the Lord, recognizing that it would take place after his time. While he expressed relief that there would be peace during his own reign, his reaction reveals the human tension between gratitude and resignation. Mercy received did not cancel the consequences that would come later. This episode closed his reign with a profound lesson. Hezekiah had been faithful, obedient, and courageous in moments of extreme crisis. Yet even a godly king could lower his guard after great victories. Pride does not always appear in defeat. Often it emerges in recognition. The narrative does not diminish his legacy. Scripture continues to remember him as a king who trusted God as no other in Judah had done before or after him. Yet it presents his life honestly, showing that faithfulness does not remove the need for constant vigilance. Hezekiah's reign ended, leaving a clear message. God honors faith, answers prayer, and fights for those who trust in him. But he also calls for continual humility. Victories are not a license for self-sufficiency, but opportunities to deepen dependence. The story of Hezekiah does not conclude in perfection, but in instruction. And that instruction remains relevant. True greatness is not only found in beginning well or in winning great battles, but in guarding a humble heart until the very end. H.J. Decisions away from the spotlight. His leadership combined declared faith with practical wisdom. The city was ready, with walls reinforced and water secured. Jerusalem had done everything humanly possible. Yet Hezekiah knew that no preparation, however solid, would be sufficient if God did not intervene. Strategy had fulfilled its role. Now the test of faith was about to appear in its most intense form, for the enemy would soon attempt something more dangerous than weapons: breaking the spirit of the people. When the Assyrian Empire realized that Jerusalem was physically prepared to resist, it changed its strategy. If the city could not be taken easily by force, something more subtle and dangerous would be attempted, breaking the confidence of the people. The threat would no longer appear only through weapons, but through words designed to sow fear, doubt, and despair. The Assyrian envoy, known as the Rabshakeh, appeared with arrogance. He did not speak in secret or with diplomatic caution. He positioned himself before the city and raised his voice so that everyone could hear. His speech was not accidental. It was carefully calculated. He spoke in the language of the people, not in a foreign tongue, to ensure that every word would penetrate directly into the minds and hearts of Jerusalem's inhabitants. The message was intimidating and provocative. The Rabshakeh questioned Judah's confidence, mocked their military preparations, and directly attacked the faith of the people. He suggested that trusting in God was useless, pointing out how other nations had fallen despite calling on their gods. His goal was not merely to inform, but to demoralize. He wanted the people to surrender before a single battle was fought. He also attacked Hezekiah's leadership. He portrayed the king as a deceiver who had led the people into false hope. He claimed that the religious reforms had weakened Judah rather than strengthened it. In this way, he sought to sow distrust between the king and his people, creating an internal fracture that the enemy could exploit. The psychological impact was intense. The Rabshakeh's words echoed against the city walls. Each phrase was crafted to awaken memories of past defeats and to magnify fear of Assyrian power. This was a battle without swords, but no less dangerous. The enemy understood that a people without hope is easily conquered. Hezekiah had given a clear instruction. The people were not to respond. Silence was a strategic decision. It was not passivity but spiritual discipline. To answer the enemy at that moment would have meant entering his game and allowing fear to set the pace of the confrontation. That silence was an act of faith. While the Rabshakeh shouted, Jerusalem remained quiet. There were no cries of panic and no impulsive replies. The people trusted the leadership that had already proven faithful and wise. Faith was not expressed in words, but in self-control. Yet the pressure did not disappear. The words spoken could not be easily unheard. Fear lingered in the air. The question was no longer whether the enemy was strong, but whether trust in God would be enough to withstand such an overwhelming threat. The conflict had entered a new phase. It was no longer only about walls, water, or weapons. It was about conviction. The attack had reached the deepest level, the faith itself. And at that critical point, Hezekiah's response would not be military, but spiritual. For when the enemy's words seek to destroy hope, the only true defense is to turn the heart completely toward God. After the verbal assault of the Rabshakeh, Hezekiah understood that the conflict had reached a level no human strategy could resolve. The walls were strong, the water supply was secure, and the army was prepared. But now the threat was aimed directly at the heart of the people. At that point, the king did not resort to new military tactics or political negotiations. He did something different. He humbled himself before God. Hezekiah tore his garments. This gesture was neither symbolic nor ceremonial. It was a deep expression of sorrow, dependence, and recognition that the situation exceeded all human ability. The king clothed himself in sackcloth and entered the house of the Lord, publicly showing that his confidence was not in strength or diplomacy, but in God. He then sent messengers to the prophet Isaiah. He did not seek political advisors or seasoned generals. He sought a word from God. He sent the spiritual leaders to intercede and consult the prophet, acknowledging that Judah urgently needed divine direction. Hezekiah understood that when the threat is spiritual, the response must be born in the presence of God. The message sent to Isaiah was clear. Hezekiah acknowledged that the day was one of distress, rebuke, and blasphemy. The enemy had not only attacked Judah, but had challenged the living God. For that reason, he asked for prayer and intercession, understanding that the honor of God was at stake, not merely the survival of the nation. Isaiah's response was firm and full of hope. The prophet delivered a direct message from the Lord. Hezekiah was not to fear. God had heard the words of the enemy and would not ignore them. The Assyrian king would not enter the city, would not shoot a single arrow against it, and would return by the same road he had come. This word was not a vague promise. It was specific, clear, and authoritative. God himself committed to defending Jerusalem for the sake of his name and for the sake of David. The victory would not come through an unexpected human maneuver, but through direct divine intervention. Prayer shifted the focus. The threat remained real, but the perspective had changed. The situation was no longer viewed only through fear, but through the faithfulness of God. Hezekiah had done the only thing he could do at that moment: place everything into the Lord's hands. This moment revealed the heart of the king. When everything was at stake, he did not cling to power or public image. He bowed low. He acknowledged his fragility and urgently sought God's voice. That humility became the turning point of the story. The divine response had already been given. Now all that remained was to wait in faith, even while the enemy still stood at the gates. For when God speaks, victory is already in motion. Long before it becomes visible, God's response did not delay, though it came in a way few would have anticipated. There was no elaborate military strategy, no sudden human uprising. Victory did not arrive through swords, arrows, or unexpected alliances. It came silently, decisively, and entirely supernaturally. That very night, God acted. While the Assyrian army rested, confident in its overwhelming power, the Lord sent his angel. Without warning, without the noise of battle, and without any opportunity for defense, the force that had terrorized entire nations was neutralized. When morning came, the Assyrian camp was filled with lifeless bodies. The power that had appeared invincible had been broken without Judah lifting a single weapon. The intervention was complete. The Assyrian army, which had presented itself as unstoppable, was dismantled in one night. What no kingdom had been able to withstand was defeated by the hand of God alone. Jerusalem was saved not by its preparation, but by the Lord's faithfulness to his word. The promise was fulfilled exactly as it had been spoken. Just as Isaiah had declared, the Assyrian king did not enter the city, did not shoot an arrow against it, and did not build a siege ramp against it. He returned by the same way he had come, defeated and humiliated. God had defended Jerusalem for the sake of his own name. The reaction was unavoidable. The fear of the Lord spread among the surrounding nations. Hezekiah's reputation grew, not because of military might, but because of his dependence on God. Judah,